Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As we said, my name's David Butler, and my study topic is biodiversity for the future of fruit farming. I'm very proud to be sponsored by Thatcher's Cider, and I'm extremely grateful of all the support they have given me, especially their product over the last 2.5 years. It's been very well needed. As we said, I am a fruit farmer, and I come from the Faversham Sittingbourne region on the North Kent coast, and I grow apples, pears, and cherries. So where did my Nuffield journey begin, and why? Well, I happen to believe there's a misconception that beautiful quality fruit like this, people think that it just grows easily on trees. We harvest it into containers such as these, send it off to the supermarket for a vast exorbitant profit, and then we jet off the Italian Riviera for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, if you do believe that, you're living in a dream world. These are some of the examples of all the issues that we have to combat every year. We have all sorts of pest and disease issues, and here are a few examples, with my favourite being your protein supplement with your fruit salad. These are all caused by bacteria, insects, fungals, pathogens, weeds, weather, soil health, and nutritional deficiencies. So how do we combat these? Traditionally, we take chemicals such as these, we mix them up into large water containers, go out into the orchard and spray directly onto the trees and the fruit to try and combat the issue in need. A lot of this stuff is done proactively rather than reactively, so you don't even know that there's a problem a lot of the time. So what do we need to do? We need to cut down the amount of chemicals we've got. One reason is the ecological and health and safety reasons. Over the last 2 decades, we've had a lot of our chemical ammunition reduced, so therefore we have to find other ways, which I am looking for biological control. Most markets now are increasingly interested in the ecological impact of fruit production. They want to know how we grow crops as well as what we produce. Back in 2019, I had a Chinese delegation come to the farm of professors and politicians who were looking to learn a lot more about UK industry. It was very good information exchange, and it got me interested in world agriculture, hence my later application to Nuffield. They were very interested to hear of the biological success story that I had back in 2010 when there was an insect called pearsucker that was threatening our entire pear crop. We'd lost the chemical control of it, and we did not know what we were going to do. After a lot of research with East Malling, we decided to go down a biological control route and give it a go. We introduced a lot of beneficial insects that were imported from Italy into the orchard via cardboard dispensers and allowed them to go and eat the larvae of the pearsucker, therefore destroying its 2nd and 3rd generations. It seemed to be a great success, but being a new venture, it's always very important to try and keep control of the cost because you do not know if it is going to be successful or not. So with that in mind, and being an advocate of child labour, I decided to get as much help as I can for as cheap as I can, and this actually only cost me a packet of fruit pastels and a trip to go and see Frozen 2 at the cinema. After a successful application, I became a 2020 Nuffield Scholar, and I had to decide where we was going to go. I managed to get around to Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, and Chile. My first trip was in August and November of 2019. I was a little bit ahead of the game, but I'd already got their go-ahead, so I went to the Netherlands. My first point of call was Wageningen University, a highly respected university out in Holland, where I met a professor there called Stefan Gerlings, who was in charge of a breeding program on trees and plants called Fresh Forward. I explained to him what I was trying to do, look at more biological control routes to control rather than chemical. He explained to me that the work they were doing on the path of least resistance in gene editing. This, for you that don't know, is the manipulation of existing DNA in a plant to make it more resistant against a potential pest or disease. Now, with this in place, we can actually cut out all sprays because it will be resistant in the first place. And I do believe that the future relies upon this, but it is not yet legal. I also went to go and see a wildflower and pollinator research centre, which proved to be very, very beneficial for my company later on. And I also thought I cracked it on my first ever visit, where they showed me this glasshouse situation, which was controlled by computers, and it completely eradicated all need for any form of chemical control because it was climate controlled. Unfortunately, I thought it's good, but how much does it cost? 600,000 euros per hectare was what I was quoted, so it immediately became unfinancially viable. In December 2019, I travelled to Italy, and I went to the New Holland agricultural manufacturing plant out in Jesi, and the reason I went for that is because I was very interested in the manufacturing that they were doing of methane, hydrogen, and electric tractors, because I do believe that we're going to have to eventually change. Unfortunately, after a fantastic trip around the manufacturing plant, I was asking lots of technical questions, and then they happened to say that most of their research was done back in Butler NSch, about 50 miles away from my house. Go figure. In February 2020, I went to New Zealand, an absolutely fantastic country, and I've never seen anyone that does the job so well. I met a fellow Nuffield scholar there called Julian Rain, and he was a fantastic host, but it was evident that the priorities of the Kiwis was a lot different than ours. They were producing intensively high-yielding, high-quality fruit for an export market, and they do it absolutely fantastically, but that is their aim. I mean, you can see the height of some of those trees there. They're twice the height of most men. Not me, obviously. They do a fantastic job, but in terms of biodiversity, one thing that really stood out to me was if you have a rootstock of a tree, that can last in the ground twice as long as the cropping would on top. It is traditional in this country that after its 25-year existence of the tree, we grub it out, disturb the soil, and put in whole new trees. What the Kiwis do is they cut the cropping wood off of the rootstock and graft on new cropping wood and leave the soil undisturbed for up to 50 to 60 years. It proved to be a very successful story. I also went to a robotics research centre out there where I was shown fantastic technologies for harvesting kiwis robotically. It was really, really good technology, and I must say it's a lot easier to do on kiwis than it is to do on any form of apples or pears or cherries at the moment, but hopefully with some clever people out there, the future will be good. I also visited a plant and research centre, and it really highlighted to me that I don't think you can get anywhere further in the world from where I live to the North Island of New Zealand, and I happened to bump into somebody we all knew by chance, Ali Kappa. In June 2022, I visited Spain. Very, very interesting landscape, and what I learnt there, what they do is they use the rocky hill faces, which are incapable of growing any form of crop, for their beneficial plants and their beehives, leaving the bottom of the ground. But I don't even need to explain this thing, because we've already seen it earlier today, so I'm just going to refer to our friend Robert and just go, what can you see? August 2022, I took a trip to Chile, and I met up with fellow 2020 scholar Antonio Bustos-Zegas. I know what you're all thinking with this photo, but I can assure you that we were on a slope and he is 7 foot tall. The first point of call I went to was an organic blueberry farm, and the manager there, Jose, was explaining to me all about the real trouble that they were having with soil-dwelling nematodes. It's a worm-type thing that lives in the soil and was completely and utterly desecrating all of the roots of their blueberry plants, and therefore their crops were totaled. What they found was, by drilling mustard instead of grass down the strips, the mustard seeds actually eradicated all the nematodes, and they had a wonderful crop from there on in. Water capture is absolutely vital in Chile. Because of that low rainfall throughout their spring and summer months, they must capture as much as they can throughout the winter running off the mountains. So every orchard that you go to, you'll find little reservoirs and man-made capture points. The two advantageous points which I've noticed from my trips to New Zealand and Chile, being southern hemisphere countries, is that they have the financial advantage of exporting to China when we can't, and that really puts them ahead of the game. I would like to thank Jody for organising a GFP trip. Just so happens as I was crossing through Chile, and I managed to piggyback on for 2 or 3 days, and I had a fantastic time with these guys completely by chance again. So when I got back home, I decided to go down a route of least chemical as completely possible. So I hired a company that were doing scanning tests on all of the fruit. So they come out 3 times a year and they scan it during blossom time, mid-fruit time, and near the end. And it tells you in advance as to whether there is a problem in the orchard. The jury's out at the moment, but the interesting technology is certainly one for the future. I also had some soil mapping done, so I could do variable rate fertilizer spreading now instead of blanket spreading, so I reduced my fertilizer output a lot. I've also drilled a lot of wildflower margins all around the farms and completely surrounded everything, and I can say that they have flourished over the last few years, and the wildlife and pollinator population has really, really increased. I've also been testing a product called RAC 3+4, which is something that you hang up in the orchards in tiny little capsules, and it releases a pheromone disruptor which covers the entire orchard in a fog, which disallows the male moths to come down and find the female moths in the trees, and therefore cannot breed and cause problems in your fruit. It seems to be working very well in the orchard, but unfortunately my problems is at home, where my wife seems to be hanging them up all around the house, hoping that it seems to be working on human beings. But I've also done a lot of research into the crops that I've been growing and the beneficial insects that I need to help me in those orchards and their inhabitants what need for all year round survival. So I've been planting a lot of hazel and willow trees and that around the headlands, because you're finding that they're not surviving all year round because they don't have a habitat. So after many years of doing this, I've got a very, very good establishment, and when we're going around doing a lot of our tap samples, the numbers are very, very encouraging, which is great, and I call it Bless the Tidy Mess. I also became part of the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, to which they'd done a case study on me as a commercial grower, in which they were trying to encourage globally people to do wildflower margins to increase the pollination of bees and insects across the UK, but this project was particularly based along the North Kent coast. So in short, every area of my farm that is not cropping trees has now got either a wildflower margin or a pollinator beneficial area for insects. It has been a long journey over the last 4 years. Adaptation along the way will happen, mistakes will happen, and you have to sacrifice some of your land and crop, and you must keep control of the costs. It is a risk over reward situation, because nothing is guaranteed in this game. You can try your best, but the rule I would say is you have to balance it with a commercial plan, because you will not survive without it, and sometimes you do feel like you're pushing the proverbial uphill. Please, please remember, it's very important to look after the environment, but you also must look after yourselves. So all I'll say to you is you cannot be green if you are in the red. My many thanks go to the following people who this would not have been possible without, and I would also like to thank my wife and children who've made this very, very good experience for me, and sometimes they're a little bit too encouraging about getting me out the house for weeks on end, but there's another story, and thank you very much for listening.